All right, people, we are live on the YouTube and the Facebook, and I am with a best-selling author, a radio host, and a man who once beat me senseless in front of millions of people. Larry Elder, welcome back to the Rubin Report.
Round two.
This will be round three.
How are you?
We're up to Rocky 3.
That's right,
you know
Rocky
what I mean?
3. Mm-hmm.
See, but if it was Rocky...
No, it's like Muhammad Ali and Frazier. You know?
Right.
Ali lost the first one, Ali lost the first one, won the second one, and then they had the big third one, Thriller in Manila. This is Thriller in Manila.
This is Thriller in Manila.
Right.
See, I wish this was more like Rocky, because in the original Rocky, it was to a standstill. Rocky 1, right? Nobody wins. Rocky 2, Rocky finally wins, and then 3, well, at that point, you're retired.
I think, Rubin, the only question is, which one of us is Ali, which one of us is Frazier?
We shall find out, my friend.
We shall find out.
All right, so you just sat down here, but we've already talked about comic books, about basketball.
About the movie Black Panther.
Yeah.
About racism, about Trump. I think we covered everything. Bye.
All right, well, let's do a little bit of it for the people. So I just want to jump back to that original moment, because I said it to you last time you were here, which was about a year ago. And when that moment where you really beat me senseless about systemic racism, that was about 2 years ago already, if not more at this point. And so many people, I was just in London 2 days ago, and I did a Q&A, and people were asking me about it. I mean, that thing really there are many versions of it on YouTube. It's just caught fire. And as I said to you last time, it was sort of, I view it as my best moment and my worst. It was my worst because I came to an intellectual fight without the proper equipment, and it was my best because we left it in and let it be, and it was a learning moment for me and then for everyone else.
Well, you had a lot of class for leaving it in. A lot of people would have taken it out, and no one would have known it happened. And secondly, the older one gets, the more difficult it is for one to kind of change one's beliefs. And for you to do it at your age, to rethink your assumptions, it takes a lot of guts. A lot of people don't want to do that.
That's a pretty depressing thing, don't you think? I agree with you. Most people don't want to do it. I think we've fostered here something that is allowing people to do it, but most people don't want to do that. You know,
and it's funny, we're in an atmosphere where just a moment ago I'm driving in listening to talk radio, and I think it's CNN or MSNBC, and they're going on and on about how Trump has now made lying the currency of the day, and no one tells the truth anymore. Facts don't matter. And they're talking about the kinds of lying that Trump does, where he talks about the crowd size and how much money he has and stuff like that. The lies of the left are huge lies, and they damage the country. The lie that racism remains a major problem in America, it's a lie. The lie that women make 77 cents on the dollar for doing the same thing that men do, it's a lie. The lie that rich get rich, the poor get poorer. These are lies, and these are big lies that drive the left and drive votes. These are the kinds of things that matter.
So when you sit across from a guy like me, and the first time we did it, when I really still felt I was part of the left, I was trying to reform the left. Realistically, I'm not part of the left anymore. You know, and again, the left-right thing, as we talk about all the time, doesn't even have that much meaning anymore. It's really about authoritarians and libertarians and all that. But for all the years that you've been doing this, staking out conservative positions for how many years publicly have you been doing this? 25 years. Was there a more sensible left at the time? Was there a guy you could sit across from that you disagreed with intellectually, but felt that it was forthright, it was honest, you just disagreed with the methodology and the results?
Sure, there were lots of people that I felt that way with. And William Buckley had a very good friend, John Kenneth Galbraith, who was a left-wing economist. They disagreed about everything. They were good friends. Believe it or not, Antonin Scalia's best friend on the Supreme Court is Ruth Bader Ginsburg. What it requires is somebody to recognize that if I have a position that's different from yours, it doesn't mean that I'm a bad guy. It doesn't mean that I'm evil. It means that I see the world differently. It takes a certain kind of maturity to do that. Unfortunately, we've gotten to the place now where if you don't believe that racism is a major problem in America, if you're black, you're a sellout. If you're white, you're a racist. If you say something negative about the Black Panther, which I just did and just tweeted, I got hammered. Some guy told me that, well, it's because it's a black person and a black director and a black hero, and therefore you don't like it. I mean, the star is a guy named Chadwick Boseman, and I was fortunate enough to be invited to see the premiere of 42. He was brilliant. I saw the movie 3 or 4 times. I like him so much. I saw him in a movie about Thurgood Marshall, which was a very good movie, probably not commercially successful, but it was a very good movie. And I saw him play in the movie with, he played James Brown. He was very good. The movie wasn't that good, but he was good.
Yeah.
So he's an intriguing actor. Again, I don't go to see a movie to not be happy, to waste my time.
Yeah, and you're a comic book guy. I mean, the reason we were talking about comic books is because I've got a whole bunch in the green room here, and you were immediately going on about all this stuff you love. So it's not like you're walking into that thing to hate it.
Right, and so the criticism is just bizarre. I mean, What do you think I am? What do you think I do? I get up in the morning, hate myself, gouge my eyeballs out, try to claw my skin color off. I mean, that's just, and Dave, I feel sorry for people like that. People have often asked me, does it make you mad? It doesn't. I feel sorry for you. If you are so trained, so indoctrinated to be that rabid against somebody who just has a different point of view, there's a problem with you, not with me.
Yeah. Well, on that note, I owe you a public thanks, not just because you beat me senseless and helped me get here, but also because everyone knows about the interview I did with Thomas Sowell, and we had been working on it for about 3 years. You sent him a note. I don't know if that was what pushed him over the edge,
right.
But I think it was one of the big things that I've been able to do here to bring some of those ideas back, and that's what you've been doing for a long time.
Well, he's like J.D. Salinger. It's hard to get him.
We had to get him out.
But once you get him, he's amazing.
Yeah.
And I met him because I was on C-SPAN. At the time, I had a 4-hour live radio show, and C-SPAN broadcasted the entire show. And I get a letter from Thomas Sowell. It was like getting a letter from Elvis. And it said, my wife and I watched your entire show. You were great. You laid out all the arguments. Very well done. And I wrote him back, and we got together several times since then. We've become very good friends.
Yeah. So I sense a massive shift happening in politics right now. And clearly the center of it right at the moment is with the black community. I don't even like using phrases like that because I don't like that collective thing, but sometimes you gotta talk about things in a way that allow most people to understand them. So, what is it, about 2.5 weeks ago or so, Kanye West, 7 words, I love the way Candace Owens thinks.
Wow. Yeah.
Now, do you think that is as big of a game changer?
Seismic shift, yeah. I think it is a game changer.
Yeah.
In the sense that Kanye West has 28 million Twitter followers. I don't know how many Instagram, I don't know how many Facebook, but you add them all together, it's a boatload of people.
Yeah.
He has more influence on the way black people think than Clarence Thomas, Thomas Sowell, Walter Williams, Larry Elder put together, unfortunately. And for him to say that and to begin the process of making it okay for black people to rethink their assumptions, make it okay to say, I'm not a Democrat, that's a huge thing. 95% of black voters voted for Obama. Trump did a little bit better, but not a whole lot better. If the Democrats lose 10, 15, 20% of that black vote, they are toast at the national level, which is why people like me have to be vilified. People like Candace Owens are now direct threats to the domination of the Democratic Party. People like Kanye West, they've got to be put down. They've got to be demeaned. You can't just say he's got a different point of view. You've got to say something is fundamentally wrong with them. Otherwise, how do you get 95% of people to vote and see the world one way? Yeah. You have to show them, prove to them, convince them that these guys are against you, that you're a victocrat, and these are victimizers. And that's what the left has done so successfully.
Man, so when you saw the reaction to him, now again, we briefly discussed this, but I don't think either one of us know what his political beliefs are, or even if he has.
I'm not sure he knows what they are, but just not to hate Republicans, not to hate Trump, that is a big deal. Think, we're in Hollywood, you and I are. Is there an A-list actor?
How we're doing it here, I have no idea.
Is there an A-list actor or an A-list actress in his or her 20s or 30s who's come out and said, I love Trump? Mm-hmm. None. Nobody. You get some older ones, maybe they've already established who've said a few things. But is there somebody right now who's hot, on the brink of stardom, or just in stardom, who's come out in favor of Trump? No.
Forget Trump, just say basic conservatives.
Yeah,
right?
because it would be damaging to their career. It's not possible that 100% of them think the same way. I don't think so. There's got to be a few. But would they come out and say something? Of course not. It would be hazardous to their career.
How'd you get a Walk of Fame star?
I'm shocked.
Who'd you pay off for that then?
Well, when someone asked me that, a reporter said, how did that happen? I said, well, this is what happens when you make a substantial donation to the Clinton Foundation. I have no idea. I know that I'm nominated all the time because I would get some sort of inquiry from people telling me that you've been nominated, and nothing ever happened, so I didn't think anything would happen. Lo and behold, who knows?
Yeah, when you think of the odd levels of racism in this town, like just the way they do things, like just a couple weeks ago, when they boot Cosby out of the, whatever it is, the Television Arts and Science Academy. So then they do Roman Polanski the same day, but it was so obvious that it was like, oh, we got to take care of Cosby now, but we don't want to make it seem like we're just booting the black guy. So where's the white guy we can get rid of? And
I don't think anything to do with black or white. I think they realize the hypocrisy. I think they realize if we're kicking out Bill Cosby because of allegations of rape, and here's a guy who pled guilty to rape, a teenager, and we're celebrating him, we have a problem here. So Cosby caused them to have to be consistent. It had nothing to do with Polanski's race or Cosby's race. It had to do with the bizarre concept of somebody being booted out because he was accused of rape, and somebody who was charged with it and pled guilty to it is okay.
I think in their own warped worldview, though, if Cosby had been white and they felt they had to get rid of him, they wouldn't have felt that they needed to get rid of another white guy. Maybe. I get it. Believe me.
It's possible, but they've caused us to think this way.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm just trying to get in their minds. I'm not trying to get in our minds. But okay, I want to get back to what you just said about the reaction to Kanye, because the reaction to me, it seemed, it wasn't just that people were like, he's wrong because he likes Trump because, lists 4 things that are sensible. It was, Candace is far right, Kanye's on opioids, 10 other smear pieces on both of them, et cetera, et cetera. And I think you're probably very aware of why that is, and you kind of hinted at it. But can you explain why it's always so overboard?
Well, again, anybody who threatens the 95% monolithic black vote is an enemy. They've got to be dealt with. They've got to be put down. And black people have been indoctrinated to believe that racism is this massive, massive problem in the world, when in fact it isn't. Massive, massive problem in America, when in fact it isn't.
Yeah.
I was on CNN the last time I was on the Don Lemon show. I reminded them of a 1997 poll that CNN and Time magazine did, where black teenagers and white teenagers were asked, is racism a major problem in America? I think you and I might have talked about this.
Yeah.
And more white teens and black teens said racism was a major problem in America. And then when the poll asked, is racism a big problem, a small problem, or no problem in your own daily lives, 90% of the black teens said a small problem or no problem in my own daily lives. That was in 1997. Now, that was before Obama, and before Obama got reelected. You're telling me now things are worse now than they were back then? Yet our so-called black leadership, people like Keith Ellison, people like Louis Farrakhan, people like Jesse Jackson, people like Sharpton, the nabobs over on MSNBC Hee Haw and CNN, if you concentrated on those guys, you'd be afraid to leave your house if you were black.
So what do you think is actually going on in the minds of these guys? I know you're not a mind reader, but like, is it truly bad intentions, or is it moral confusion, political confusion?
It's hard to say. I think some of it is cynical, some of it is BS. Recently, for example, I just saw that a chapter head of an NAACP chapter in South Carolina wrote a big Facebook post about being pulled over, and the officer asking him about drugs and asking him about why are you having such a fancy car, and he wrote a big Facebook post about it. Unfortunately, the officer recorded everything. And it turned out everything the guy said was a lie. This is the chapter head of the NAACP in that town in South Carolina. Now, is racism so bad that you have to make up stuff?
Man, but that shows you the call that victimhood has right now, for whatever reason.
Remember the young lady, the actress from the movie Django here on Santa Monica? And she was apparently having sex with her boyfriend in her car. Somebody called 911, and she accused the officers of asking all sorts of things about her race. And she didn't realize she was being recorded. Turns out she was wrong, and a judge made her write a letter of apology. I mean, really?
So what do you do? What do you do? I was at University of New Hampshire 2 weeks ago, and there were a bunch of protesters there. Black Lives Matter sent a bunch of people, and I kept saying that I'm for everyone having equal respect under the law, and I want
you
people
can't
to
say
be
all lives matter. That's racist too.
I even said Black Lives Matter because I did everything I could to make it clear that I want us all to be treated equally with dignity. But you know what it's like when you get some of these protesters, the ones that are not an average protester who may want to listen a little bit and then ask a question.
Right. When
you get the ones that are just there to berate and scream and the rest. So one of the protesters, or there were a couple at one point, who were saying, something like, we could be shot when we get out of here, all this hate speech, all of this stuff. And I realized, even though I kept saying what I believed to be true and what I believed to be right, there was almost nothing I could do.
Right.
So what do you do for those people? Because I think the masses are shifting a little bit. But what do you do for that group?
You're not going to win every argument. You really can't. And if somebody is invested with the idea that the man is holding me back, that officers pull me over because of my race, there's not a whole lot you can do about it. You can point to studies. I mean, it's been studied.
They're not big on studies.
Under Obama in 2013, I think it was, the National Institutes of Justice, which is the research arm of the DOJ, did a study called Race and Traffic Stops. Turned out 75% of the black motorists who were stopped said, I got stopped for legitimate reasons. It turned out that you name the traffic offense: speeding, driving without your lights on, driving without a seatbelt on, driving without proper registration. You name the offense, a black motorist was more likely to commit it. And the NIJ report said, yes, blacks are stopped more often than whites are, but the reasons have to do with, quote, differences in offending, end of quote. Came out under Obama. Quietly, nobody talked about it.
How much of this then is just a failure of what the Republicans have done? I get you on all of the things that the Democrats and the left have sold that are lies. I get the way they manipulate all these different minority communities. But it seems to me, because there is a resurgence now, right? Like the first thing I said to Thomas Sowell, are you excited that you're having this resurgence? He kind of looked at me like, well, I've been doing this for 50 years, sort of. Right. Or that people now share the clip of us endlessly, and Candace and Kanye and all of this.
Right.
This does seem to be coming back, but some of this has to be on the Republicans too, right? That it got so bad.
Well, yeah. I mean, the Republicans have done a bad job in marketing their brand. Most people don't even know that the Democrats opposed the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, sometimes unanimously. Most people don't know that as a percentage of the party, more Republicans voted for the passage of the Civil Rights Act in the Senate and in the House than did Democrats. And there's this myth that what happened is there was this big switch in the 60s when all the racists from the South left the Democratic Party and joined the Republican Party. When in fact, if you look at all of the Democrats that voted against the Civil Rights Act in the House and the Democrats, of all of them, only 2 switched parties and became Republicans. The first Republican senator from Tennessee since Reconstruction was a guy named Howard Baker, who was a guy who was in favor of integration. So it's a big lie, and Republicans have done a poor job in telling the truth. The other thing is, Republicans are gentle. When they're called racist, they often just don't say anything or ignore it or hope the moment goes away. Recently, Mike Kelly from Pennsylvania, a Republican member of the House, squared off with Maxine Waters. There was this bogus report that purported to show that auto dealers jack over black people by charging them more interest rates to get loans, when in fact all these things are done by algorithms. There's nothing to do with race at all. And Mike Kelly happened to be in the car business. So he knew it wasn't true. And he challenged her. And he said something to the effect of, we Republicans have an obligation to, when we are confronted with nonsense, to call it. And we need to start calling it. And that's the problem. People often say to me, Larry, you can say stuff we can't say.
Yeah.
Really? You are incapable of articulating the words your brain cannot put out the conversation I just did?
Yeah.
And that's the problem. When white people are called racist, why don't you defend yourself? You know who you are, you know how you feel, you know what you've done, you know what your thoughts are, and someone calls you racist and just let it go? I mean, it's a problem.
Yeah. Are you feeling this glow right now? I mean, you must be feeling pretty good about this. Like something has shifted here. It's gotta feel good, right?
I can sense that. Well, you saw a poll, and it showed. I'm big on facts, not on feelings. I'm big on facts.
I was letting you have a feeling.
Thank you. The poll showed that the support for Trump doubled among black men.
Incredible, right? From 11 to 22%.
Yeah, and in less than a week, in about a week, and it shows you there was a dike, and once the dike broke, it broke, and the support for blacks in general has increased about 50%. For Trump over the last few weeks. All of it because Kanye West, Candace Owen have made it okay for people all around the country to have conversations like you and I are having right now.
Yeah.
And these kind of conversations are taking place. And black people are saying, wait a second, Donald Trump wants to build a wall and do something about illegal immigration, in part because studies have shown. There's an economist named George Borjas. He's probably done more work on the impact of illegal immigration than any other economist. There's no question, he writes, that illegal immigration, unskilled especially, poses competition for jobs for people in the inner city and puts downward pressure on their wages. So Donald Trump wants to do something about that. And studies have shown that when parents have vouchers, the results are better, the kids graduate at a higher rate, their test scores are better, and the parental satisfaction is through the roof. And Donald Trump wants to provide inner city parents with vouchers, and the polls show that inner city parents want them, and the teachers union, which is right in the pocket of the Democratic Party and vice versa, does not want you to have those, but Donald Trump is a bigot. So people all around the country are having this conversation, and the economy has done well, and under Obama, the black labor force participation rate, the percentage of black men looking for jobs or working, hadn't been that low since they were keeping stats. And under Donald Trump, black unemployment is at an all-time low, in part because he's lowered taxes and stopped turning back some of these stupid regulations that strangle businesses. And when business doesn't do well, the people that suffer the most are the people at the bottom, the ones that need a job and don't have a job. And Donald Trump is doing something about that, but he's a racist? That's kind of a difficult argument to make. His daughter is a converted Jew.
Yeah.
One member of his cabinet is the formerly respected Ben Carson, but Donald Trump's a bigot?
Don't forget our openly gay now ambassador to Germany, Rick Grinnell, and a series of other people.
And don't forget all
and
the
Nikki Haley at
all the video
UN.
you see of Donald Trump hanging out with Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton back in the day when they thought that he could benefit them. Now all of a sudden he's a bigot. It's outrageous. And that conversation is being taken place all over the country. Also rappers, as you well know, used to rap about Trump all the time. I think, one syllable word, his name rhymes with a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So they used it, and they often talked about aspiring to be like Trump. Then he ran for president and became an SOB. How did that happen?
Do you think he was just the guy that was the only guy that could have done it, basically?
I think so. Hillary was the best funded, best backed candidate I've ever seen. And it took somebody to take on the media and to cut through CNN and MSNBC through social media. Also, Trump snuck up on people. The media is really angry at themselves for letting it happen. I read that he got about $2 billion in free advertising. Now, a lot of it was bad.
Yeah, I mean,
but the numbers went up. Whenever they showed them, the numbers went up. And as they began knocking off people, they realized that he was being taken seriously, and then it was too late.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned that poll, that 11 to 22% amongst black male poll. That thing came out. I quickly saw it on Twitter. And then I kind of looked around. I was like, wait a minute, this seems massive. Like, we shouldn't understate this.
Right.
A doubling of support.
Right.
Now, if at any point it had doubled under Obama, although you're saying it was high enough to the point that it couldn't have doubled, but under any other situation with any other minority, the media would have been going bananas.
And it was, I think as I recall, a respected poll too, wasn't it Reuters?
I'm not totally sure, but by every estimation, it was a legit poll.
Yeah, a legit poll, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
that just shows you where the media is at with this.
They can't talk about it. To talk about it also then lends energy to it and would encourage more and more people to rethink their assumptions. So let's just ignore it.
Yeah.
I once asked Thomas Sowell, when you write a column like this, I forget what column it was, but it was some column, I think, challenging the assumption of race-based preferences. And he challenged some big study. And I said, when you write something like this and you effectively refute some study, what happens? He said, usually nothing. He said they ignore it, next thing, and they move on to something else.
Yeah, man, it's a long game here. It's a long game. For sure. So when I've had you on, one of the pushbacks that I get after, people always say, well, all right, I'll grant him a little something. Like if they're willing to give you a little something, they'll go, all right, he may be right. We don't have laws that are against black people, so it's not systemic, if that's what you're defining systemic as. And people seem to have a couple different definitions of systemic. But they'll talk about the history of inequality and why that needs to be compensated for now. Now, I suspect you might say, well, most of those policies that have created that inequality are because of the Democrats, but that's the last word I'm going to put in your mouth. How do you acknowledge that argument?
Well, all a state can be is just in its own time. My father wasn't a slave. My father never met his father, but I'm sure he wasn't a slave either. And so the people right now on the face of the earth had nothing to do with historical injustices to black people. And you could take a wand and wave it over America and remove every smidgen of racism from the hearts of white America. How will that solve the social problems that are really facing the black community? Primarily the large number of black kids that are raised without fathers in the home. 73% right now of black kids are raised without fathers. 25% of inner city black kids have a criminal record, either arrested, in jail, on parole, or on probation. 50% of the inner city kids are dropping out of high school, and those that do graduate often cannot read, write, and compute at grade level. What does any of that have to do with racism? And many of these cities and school boards have been run by Democrats and run by black people for decades.
So if we remove the racism part of it, but acknowledge those numbers, your answer would be that we have to, then change the education system? I mean, for me, it's you got to start at the bottom, right?
It all starts in the home.
Yeah.
Recently, I was pleased to watch Denzel Washington being interviewed about his movie, Roman J. Israel, which was about a criminal defense lawyer. And someone put a mic in his face and asked Denzel Washington, what about the a large number of blacks who were being warehoused by the criminal justice system. And I just knew he was going to say something about, yeah, we need to do something about the systemic racism, blah, blah, blah. He didn't. He said it all starts in the home. I saw it in my generation and every generation thereafter. If you're raised by the streets, then the streets become your father, and the courts become your home, and the jail becomes your residence. That's what he said, something to that effect.
Yeah.
And it was spot on. I didn't expect it. And again, I think things like that, when you add them all up, will cause people to start rethinking their assumptions.
Yeah. Are you feeling it like when you're doing your radio show and you're taking calls now?
It's hard to say because, you know, I'm often preaching to the crowd.
Yeah.
I like to think that the reason my numbers are so big is that I'm getting people that don't normally listen to a conservative/libertarian talk show host. But it's hard to say because the people who call in are motivated. They're driven to call in. They don't necessarily represent the entire population base. So it's hard to say. Plus, you choose calls because they're entertaining, because the person has a good point of view, has a good speaking voice, gets to the point quickly. So there are all sorts of factors that go into it. So it's not scientific.
Yeah, I like that you just described yourself as a conservative/libertarian, because I think on the libertarian side of stuff, I think we're pretty much. Mm-hmm. You know, as close to lockstep as you can get. What do you see as the differences between those two positions? Does it even matter to you?
Well, the reason I use that is because people often call me a conservative. I don't consider myself that. I consider myself to be a libertarian, a small libertarian who's a registered Republican. I don't run from the term conservative, and most of my views are conservative, but I'm more libertarian than.
Yeah. What does conservative even mean to you anymore? What is like the phrase? If someone says you're a conservative, what do you think?
When I think of a conservative, I think of a fiscal conservative and a social conservative. And on things like same-sex marriage, things like doctor-assisted suicide, things like drugs, I believe all those things should be done on a state-by-state basis. I'm a federalist that way. Yeah. A lot of conservatives are perfectly okay with, in my opinion, passing laws that would ban certain behavior that they don't like, and I'm not in that camp. I guess also conservatives. Probably, I remember listening to Ann Coulter. Ann Coulter was talking about how she opposed the idea of legalizing drugs and talked about the cost to society for that. Mm-hmm. Well, a libertarian wouldn't think that way at all.
That you just accept that it's the price to pay for freedom, basically.
Freedom is expensive. It's a value in and of itself. Yeah. And when you talk about the cost of this, the cost of that, what about the cost of freedom? What about the value of freedom? The value of being able to do what you want, provided you're not hurting somebody else.
So when you said something to the effect of that we're all men of our own time, mm-hmm. Do you think...
All you can be is just in your own time.
All you can be is just in your own time. That's even better. Mm-hmm. So when you said that, if we were to look back when we had federal laws and that actually were racist, and Jim Crow laws and things like that, and then we had the Civil Rights Act of 1963 or 64, I always forget.
64.
64? Mm-hmm. Now that stopped it at the federal level. Would you have been okay if the states had dealt with that? Because I get that one a lot now, because people will say, Dave, you're a libertarian. They made the argument against it.
It's probably the biggest question and the biggest argument that people have against libertarians. Yeah. Barry Goldwater voted against the Civil Rights Act of 1964. He became the standard bearer for the Republican Party in '64. He later on said he regretted his vote against the bill. But at the time, he said, I'm voting against the bill because of libertarian reasons. He wasn't a racist. He didn't believe the government should tell you, if you're operating a store, whether or not somebody could come in or come out, mm-hmm. And whether or not you should be forced to serve somebody. And he is not wrong. I know that freaks a lot of black people out, but think about it. The country changed rapidly, and laws can't make you change. We change, and therefore the laws changed because we changed. America changed. And bigotry, there's zero tolerance for anti-black white bigotry. Zero tolerance for it in America. My goodness, anybody who's outed as a bigot gets hammered. Look what happened to Donald Sterling. He lost his team for crying out loud. So if some guy somewhere decided he wanted to open up a bar and no black people come and sign that says only whites, he would be socially maligned. Friends who go there would malign the person. When I lived in Cleveland in the 70s, there was an area called Little Italy. And I was told, if you go to Little Italy and you're black, they will spit in your food. They don't want you there. Everybody I know told me that. So nobody I know went there, Anybody I know who did go there, if they told anybody, they were socially scorned. And in 14 years I was living in Cleveland, Little Italy got smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So racism is not financially beneficial. The reason Branch Rickey hired Jackie Robinson was not to be a civil rights pioneer. He wanted to beat the damn Yankees, and he wanted a fast shortstop or first baseman who could do it. And once other teams realized that these guys were good, they had to get them too.
Yeah. So although I can tell you wouldn't be for reversing the Civil Rights Act, you could make an argument in a modern sense for that all of these things should just be kicked to the states, right?
Correct.
Yeah, I'm there on that too, which I think people always attacking libertarians for.
And regarding federal institutions like schools and things like that are government, of course the 14th Amendment applies.
But can you explain why? Because again, this is where I think people just get lost.
Well, the 14th Amendment says no state shall deny anybody equal protection. So it's got to be a state actor, a college or university that's state. But a private university should be able to do what they want, even though none of them can because everybody accepts federal dollars and therefore the government can tell you what to do. There is one university, Hillsdale, and a few others that don't take any federal money, and therefore they can admit who they want by whatever criteria they want, and that ought to be what should happen in any institution in the private sector, whether it's a grocery store or college or university.
What do you make of just the line of thinking that we would ever be able to set a series of laws in place that would perfect the whole damn thing? Because that's really what this comes down to. They think basically we can basically whittle away your ability to think, really.
Right.
And then you'll all act like sort of automatons and behave, and no one will be racist and whatever. But at the same time, and we know this because of Silicon Valley right now, no one will be able to come up with an ingenuitive thought. No one will have an original premise or ability to do anything cool anymore.
Right. Well, that's the problem with the left. That's why they're moral busybodies. So right now in I think it's Seattle, they just passed a law that's going to tax businesses so that they can build more shelter for homeless people. The more you encourage this kind of behavior.
I was just there in Seattle last week. A lot of homeless people.
The more
already.
you're going to get, Have you been downtown LA recently?
Yeah.
Up in Seattle, up in San Francisco. These are all places that are all left wing, and they're very generous, and they all feel sorry for the homeless, and therefore they're making it easier and easier for homeless people all over the country to move there, and making it easier and easier for you to be a little less responsible because you know you're going to get a house that somebody else is going to pay for.
Yeah. So as a guy that you were born in LA, right?
Born and raised.
So you were born and raised in LA. First off, why haven't you? Why haven't you? You want to do a little singing?
Born in USA in LA.
First off,
I don't know where I was going to go with that, but you interrupted my flow. So,
first off, why haven't you run against Maxine Waters already? I mean, what are you doing? For God's sakes, let me support you, please.
I would lose. I supported a guy named Ross Moen against her a few years ago. And this is the only time I ever really went out and campaigned for somebody else. I mean, I made speeches for him, gave money to him, had him on my radio show a bunch of times. Vietnam vet, great guy, white guy. And he lost, I want to say, 84% to 16%. I mean, it was just a smashing. She has that district in her hands. And
I mean, she strikes me as actually dangerous to democracy at a certain level. When she keeps going up, we're gonna find the reason to impeach him. Forget who the president is. Forget what you think about Trump.
She is dangerous, but Dave, I'll tell you who I think is more dangerous. People like Eric Holder, because Eric Holder is taken seriously by the left. Maxine Waters is a caricature. They have her for the reason I mentioned earlier, to keep black people angry, to stoke up the anger, but no one takes her seriously. When Eric Holder comes out and says that the fact that black boys are disproportionately expelled from their schools compared to their population percentage, when he calls that pernicious racism, when in fact it's because of their bad behavior, that's taken seriously. When Eric Holder says that the reason blacks get longer sentences compared to a white criminal defendant who committed the same crime, when the U.S. Sentencing Commission says the reason is because judges take into consideration arrest records at the end of the sentencing process, and the black criminal defendant unfortunately has a bigger arrest record than the average white guy who gets arrested for the same crime. And Eric Holder, in a speech, referred to that disparity as pernicious racism, even though the Sentencing Commission said what I just now said. Eric Holder says that the push for voter ID, which the majority of blacks want, is pernicious racism. This guy is taken seriously.
That's the one that really bothers me, that when they imply that somehow black people can't get an ID. I mean, you have to have an ID to drive a car.
Right.
You have to have an ID to go into a bar. Somehow.
Some of the events that Maxine Waters puts on, you have to have an ID to get into.
Yeah. No, I'm sure most of them you do.
Yeah, yeah.
But really, did they not realize that that's actual racism?
Yeah, what's condescending to it's you know.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Do you remember, I think we discussed this once, but I'd love to just dive back into it for a second, like a moment in your formative years, your younger years, when you finally were just like, this is what it is, and I'm just going to say what it is?
I can't think of a time like that. I know that there have been many times where I've said things and gotten hell for it. I remember being in college, we read Daniel Patrick Moynihan's report, I think I mentioned that to you, called A Negro Family, A Case for National Action.
A classical liberal, by the way, Daniel Patrick Moynihan.
Right, and I got hammered by the whites in my class for being pro-patriarchal, I think that was the term that was used. And I'm raised in the inner city, and I saw a problem. And I thought that Daniel Patrick Moynihan was a canary in the coal mine and talked about this problem. So I said so, and I got hammered. Yeah. But I don't remember any particular moment. I've always just been confident about who I am and what I am. And my parents always told me that I could be whatever I wanted to be. And my dad was a Republican. And so I saw my dad walk into a voting booth. This is during the primary season in my neighborhood. And because there's nothing but Democrats there must have been about 10 or 12 little booths where you stand in for the Democrats, one for Republicans, for that rare guy that came there. And that's my dad. He's the only Republican in my whole neighborhood. He would come up there, and everybody, of course, could see he's a Republican because he'd walk up there. He didn't care. And he knew that a lot of blacks felt Republicans were bad people and evil people. He didn't care. My father couldn't have cared less. Yeah. And
yeah, it's just this thing around race. It's gross. I hate the fact that when we have you on, that we end up talking about this so much.
It is gross, especially when you consider America is the least racist white majority society in the country, the only one that's ever elected a black president and re-elected one. Orlando Patterson, he's a left-wing sociologist at Harvard, said America has more opportunities for blacks than any other country in the entire world, including all of those in Africa. Yeah. Best fed, best educated. You know, and here we are bitching and moaning and whining about what happened during slavery and Jim Crow. I mean, honestly, in order to be successful, this was an aide to Bill Clinton. He said you need to do three things to escape poverty: graduate from high school, don't have a kid before you're 20, and get married before you have a kid. If you follow that formula, only 7 or 8% of people are poor. However, if you don't follow that formula, the majority of people are going to be poor. Yeah. That's it. Now, what does it have to do with racism? What does it have to do with David Duke? Explain that to me.
Yeah, let's talk about that part of it, though. So the David Dukes, it's so silly to even have to bring him up, or just whatever the truly racist part of the right is. And I do believe it does exist. There are racists. There are actual racists. There are some of the alt-right crew, whatever that.
And on the left too, the Sharptons and the Farrakhan's on the left.
Absolutely. I just want to give it the devil is due on the right for a moment.
However, David Duke doesn't have a TV show every Sunday on MSNBC the way Al Sharpton does. Al Sharpton falsely accused a white man of raping Tawana Brawley, referred to Mayor David Dinkins, the first and only black mayor of New York, as an N-word whore. He was right in the thick of the Crown Heights riot, which was the most serious pogrom in the history of America. He's on tape urging Jews to pin their yarmulkes and come over to my house and let's get it on. He's on a surveillance tape with the FBI discussing doing a cocaine deal. He owes $5 million in taxes. He's got a TV show on MSNBC every Sunday interviewing A-list important people. Scotty, beam me up. And so when I hear all this stuff about the racism on the right, and this guy has a show, I mean, it's outrageous. And Don Lemon recently referred to Donald Trump, quote, as a racist. Nothing happened. Glenn Beck, who's not a news guy, he's a commentator, called Barack Obama a racist, and a group called Color of Change, which is a major Soros-backed left-wing organization, put a petition targeting his advertisers. Nobody had a problem with Don Lemon calling Trump a racist, but calling Obama racist, oh my goodness, bring out the pitchforks.
Is the problem there that you don't want your side in this case to start using the same tactics? So it becomes like an uneven battlefield, right? So like, what's her name on Fox? Laura Ingraham says the thing about David Hogg, was it, right? And then she gets boycotted, and Fox definitely, at least for a couple days, was considering firing her. I'm told on pretty good account.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, or at least there was going to be some sort of longer suspension or something, and that the right doesn't do that. The right just, if somebody on the left says something crazy, or just let's use the case of the guy you're talking about. So Al Sharpton, he's on MSNBC, and it's just like, all right, nobody's watching this nonsense. Let it be.
Well, the double standards, it's just it's in the cake. A recent example of that is this staffer, apparently a low-level staffer in the White House, was discussing the fact that John McCain apparently is going to vote against Gina Haspel, the nominee for the CIA. And this staffer said something to the effect of, "That's okay, he's dying anyway," close quote. How that got out is beyond me, but it gets out. Her name gets out, and now Donald Trump is being attacked because he hasn't apologized to John McCain and John McCain's family for what this low-level staffer says. When Obama was in office, I think it was 2014, a, quote, senior Obama official, close quote, was how the Hill described it, referred to Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, as chicken bleep, except it wasn't bleep, and also called him a coward. Nobody pressured Obama into apologizing, and Obama didn't apologize. John Kerry did to Netanyahu, but Obama was not pressured into saying this. Now, what's worse, calling one of our closest allies chicken bleep, or some low-level staffer referring to a senator because of his vote, as it doesn't matter, he's dying anyway? Which is worse? And which one caused the more controversy? The one about McCain did. The one about Obama, tree fell in the forest, didn't make a sound.
So with all the understandable disdain that you have for the mainstream media, and I'm with you on all of that, and you know, the things that I see people say about you, and just this group of people that I know to be decent human beings, are you at all concerned that if the mainstream media completely collapses, which I would argue either has already happened or is an inevitability, at least at this point, that what we're going to be left with is such a siloing of opinion that we are going to be completely unable to have any sort of national conversation? Look, maybe that gets everything back to a local level, which I would be okay with, but are you concerned with that at all?
I'm not. I'm not one of those who thinks things are worse now than they've ever been. I mean, this is a country where we fought over big issues for a long time. The Revolutionary War, of course, and then, of course, we had the War of 1812, we had the Civil War, World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Korean War, 9/11. People hated Ronald Reagan. They thought he was a warmonger. George Bush, what was it, Bush lied, people died. There's tension in this country. There always has been for a very long period of time. We get along better now than ever before. I don't think you can understate the fact that we elected and re-elected a black president. In the 50s, the polls show that the percentage of white Americans who would be willing to vote for a black person, no matter how well qualified, was in the single digits. And now, I think only 3 or 4% of Republicans and Democrats say that under no circumstances would they vote for a black person for president. In fact, there's greater prejudice against a Mormon and against voting for a woman than it is voting for a black person now. So America is a very different place than it used to be. Yeah. And for the left to act like it's not insults the men and women who worked hard to get us to where we are right now.
Yeah, well, just that lack of acknowledgement of how things have moved forward. When I did this University of New Hampshire thing last week, I said at the beginning of the speech, I said, everyone in this room, I would guess this without exception, that everyone in this room has it better than their grandparents had it. And I didn't see anyone nodding. Nobody said no. They're still yelling at me after about all of this stuff. Meanwhile, they're at an extremely good school and all of those things. But it's a lack of acknowledgement of reality, right?
Let me give you a sort of a trivial example, personal example. I was in school, in college in the late 70s. And I met a woman, later on in Cleveland, I met a woman whose father was an aeronautical engineer. And he was about 10 years younger than my dad. And I said, she first said he was an engineer. And I said, what kind of engineer? I thought she meant like a trained engineer. And she said, aeronautical engineer. I said, your dad is an aeronautical engineer? I said, where did he go to school? She told me he went to school at a black school in the South. And I said, I would imagine there are no more than 5 guys his age, plus or minus 10 years, with a degree in aeronautical engineering. And she went back home and asked her dad. And her dad said maybe 5 guys. She had no idea how rare this guy was. And so I met him, I talked with him, and I said, what happened when you got out of school? I couldn't get a job. I wrote to everywhere. I wrote to Westinghouse. I wrote to every major company, and nobody would hire me. And I was going to get on a freight and go to Mexico because I heard they were hiring. Wow. And right before I was going to get on the freight, because I had no money, I got a phone call from the government and began working for the government the rest of his life. Engineer. Now, in the 70s, I was in college. And, in law school, and I had a roommate who was an engineer, a computer engineer. And Dave, the companies recruited him like he was an NCAA top pick. And he had another good friend too, same thing. Both of them, one of them ended up a long career at Procter & Gamble and made so much money that he dedicated a wing to the computer school at Michigan. And the other one, my roommate William, is still with TRW, a very good career there. They were recruited like rock stars. And my girlfriend's father could not get a job as an engineer when he got out of school. That's the difference between, and that was I was in law school in the late 70s. That's 40 years ago. You're telling me now things aren't much better than even then? And then they were recruited like rock stars? Knock it off. Yeah. Do your homework. Graduate from high school. Don't have a kid before you're 20 years old, and get married first, and you will be just fine in America.
Yeah, and it's so interesting how a healthy society deals with its past injustices. Because I use the examples of going to Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's house, where you take that tour, they are very honest about his relationship to slavery, that he was having an affair with at least one slave. An affair is a kind word to say, while at the same time writing the laws that freed the slaves. Or I went to George Washington's house, and he didn't free his half of the slaves until he died. It was in his will, but Martha still kept the other half. But they acknowledge all of that. And there's so many people that just want to point at them and say they were racists, and this country was founded by them.
They knew it was a cancer. And it was, and that it was going to, at some point, fester to the point where something had to be done. They knew it. Ben Franklin, his last speech was a fiery speech urging the abolition of slavery. In fact, he founded a society for the abolition of slavery. So the Founding Fathers, many of them were conflicted, but many of them were aware that this is something that we need to deal with. And as you know, that in the Constitution, there's a specific date that says at this point there'll be no more importation of slaves. I think it was 1824.
Yeah, and yet people want to kind of sit in this and not let us escape, and then it leads to identity politics on the left, which then I think is the reason that we now have a version of identity politics on the right, and then we're caught.
Well, 7 billion people are in the world, and I dare say that most of them would trade places with us if they could. Yeah. And many Americans, unfortunately, don't seem to appreciate that.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about California a little bit, and LA in particular, because as you said, born and bred in LA, South Central, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. Although now they call it South LA because South Central has a negative connotation. So they moved it, now they call it South LA.
South LA. Yeah, that's very fancy. That's very fancy. But we actually live about 10 minutes away from each other.
You can tell how old somebody is in LA if they refer to the area where I grew up as South Central versus South. Yeah. Anybody north of 50 calls it South Central. Anybody south of 50 calls it.
I did not even know it was South LA now, but that's. I knew there was a West LA.
Yeah,
I didn't even.
They call it South
I knew there was
LA
a East LA
because South Central became synonymous with Black LA, and that's racist. So therefore they stopped doing it. I think also realtors didn't like it either. Didn't like the area being called South Central because it meant the property values might not be as high.
Yeah. Well, we also have an area here, Baldwin Hills, that's known as the Black Beverly Hills. And actually, when I was going to buy a house, when I ended up at this house, I went to Baldwin Hills.
It's a beautiful area.
And it's gorgeous. Yeah. I actually didn't know that it was known as the Black Beverly Hills, and obviously that wouldn't have bothered me or anything. But when I went to the house, and I'm looking at the house, and it was actually pretty nice, and the price is pretty decent relative to whatever, because there's some oil things over there and whatever else. I remember the realtor was like, and you know, it's 90% Black and 6% Hispanic and 2% white or something, and I was like, all right. Like, all right.
Yeah.
It's okay. We're all humans. All right, but I want to talk about LA and California in general, because I do sense that because progressive politics have gone so bananas here, and you referenced San Francisco earlier, and I was just there, and our car got broken into, and they stole my bag, and basically 10 o'clock at night in front of a nice restaurant, and I literally saw someone shooting up, and there were homeless tents, and all of this stuff. I think that because progressive politics have gone so overboard, that there is a little bit of a libertarian streak starting to take root here. You took a deep breath in as I said it.
I hope you're right, because the homelessness problem is massive. Our budgets are terrible. The fastest growing item on the budget is unfunded pension liabilities from all the generous packages we've given to government workers. Those workers are young. Many of them, I think in California, I read there are about 10,000 former government workers that get pensions of $100,000 a year or more for the rest of their lives, which are adjusted for cost of living. Far more generous than any pension you get in the private sector, assuming you could get one in the first place. So that's on automatic pilot. And we're driving away businesses with all the taxes. California has been rated the worst state in which to do business for every single year. A magazine called CEO Magazine has been in business. And small business people have also rated it as one of the worst places in which to do business. That's why we're losing indigenous population, people born and raised in California, going to places like Texas and Nevada and Florida.
It's interesting. I was in Denver last week, and the Uber driver was showing me how Denver's just exploding right now. Just the whole area is exploding, and all the rural areas are just becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. And the guy goes, well, we got lower taxes here in Colorado, so all you rich California people are coming here. So we're really, people really need to understand that. People eventually decide to use the foot vote and go, all right, I'm sick of paying these taxes. I'm going to go live in a mansion where I can only live in an apartment,
and you can go online and see it. There's an online site that shows where the money goes, tax revenues, and where it's going.
Where is it going?
And it's going to the so-called red states. States like Wyoming, states like that are finding a booming population, and states like Illinois and California and Connecticut are losing indigenous population to other states.
Yeah.
Because of the taxes and the regulations.
Do you think there's any chance some of this could be reversed here? You've been here for a long time, man. Longer. I've only been here for 5 years, and I'm slightly hopeful.
Here's the problem with California. The demographics are not in our favor. In 1994, I think it was, Proposition 187 passed. Talk about a quote, harsh, anti-illegal immigration law.
Can you tell me what
187 forbade illegals using education funds, did not allow illegal aliens to use any medical funds except for emergency. So no education, no health care, no nothing, illegal aliens. It passed among whites, it passed among blacks, it passed among Hispanics, it passed among Asians. It did not pass, of course, among Hispanics. At the time, the Hispanic vote in California was maybe 10%. Now it's about 25%, and it's rising. And Hispanics believe, especially those from Mexico, Republicans are racist and they only care about the rich. The LA Times did a study and asked them questions like that, and those were the two responses that were the most frequent. Republicans are racist, only care about the rich, selfish, and only care about the rich. And they don't come from a libertarian point of view, a federalist point of view. They don't know from Thomas Jefferson, from Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, which limits the federal government to a handful of things, leaving everything else to the states and to individuals. They don't know from that.
So the point is, we got our work cut out.
We got our work cut out for us.
Listen, we could do this forever. That was a quick freaking hour, and I know you got a hard out because you got a job.
I have a radio show to do right now.
You got a radio show to do. All right, we're going to do this again.
Have your fans follow me on Twitter at Larry Elder, at Larry Elder.
I'm a pro. It's all right there. Follow him on Twitter.
And I've got a blog called The Elder Statement, elderstatement.com.
Yeah. When are you going to bring the mustache back? Every time I Google image search you, and there's
I'm going to rock the fro back. You see my fro picture?
That picture. I retweeted that picture because you had that was like a
well. What happened is this troll said, "You think you're white? You've always wanted to be white. You probably always wanted to be white." And so I said, "Really?" And I just put that picture.
Can you tweet that one out today? I want to share it so all these people can see it. All right, man. Listen, it's a pleasure. There is a place. I don't want to mention it on air, but there is a new restaurant right in between our houses, like right in between. That is freaking awesome right around here. I'm taking you out.
Say the word
for dinner. You and your girlfriend.
You got it.
It's been a pleasure, my friend, as always. I'm sorry we had to do this so quick. We'll do this again.
Power to the people, death to the fascist pig.
I can't do better than that. And communication.